Welcome to our options review of the upcoming earnings announcement week for Tesla. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, please take time to like and subscribe. For those of you who are Patreon supporters, as you know, we have additional shows, as well as early access to information, as well as daily shows not found on the main channel that help you to invest and trade better. And I would highly recommend you consider joining us in that manner. So, today we wanted to do a show, and we're kind of targeting what options will look like going into the current quarter for Tesla. I have sort of two charts we're going to be working with today. My thought was to perhaps post them early in the show so that you could maybe get a screenshot of it and look through it as we're going through it as well. I have to say that today is a bit challenging because for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've pretty much pegged what the market makers were trying to accomplish. And the fact is that they did mostly accomplish what they wanted to do. And as you'll note, when I do shows, I typically note what I'm hoping for, which is for Tesla to do well, the stock to do well. But we also do sort of a data-based what the market makers are going to try to do, and therefore try to give you better information to work with rather than seat of the pants, sort of articulating what the numbers are suggesting. Now, earnings are coming up for Tesla, as you know, and they're coming on, I believe it's the 26th, but it's early in the week, regardless of the day. And so this is actually really good because there's a lot of time for options to make a move after the announcement is made. So the first chart that I wanted to review with you is a brief one I put together. One of my recommendations is looking at all the major numbers within 100 points of where the stock is currently. So the first one, you'll see the list says 700 calls. There are 21,000 of them for this coming week. Puts, there are 4,705. At the 650 level, which I think is way more significant than the 700s, there's 11,000 calls and actually 14,000 puts, which I think is really interesting because usually Tesla has a, 3-to-1 at least, if not 5 or 6-to-1 calls to put ratio going on. So to have 14,000 puts at the 650 level and the stock's at 644 is a bit of a surprise. And I believe this suggests that there are a lot of people that have heavy dollars that think Tesla stock price is going to fall. The final number we wanted to look at here in general is the 600 calls and puts. There are 5,100 calls at the 600 level and 27,500 puts at the 600 level. Now, on the raw numbers, obviously you can say from that chart, there are 21,000 calls at 700 and there are 27,000 puts at 600. And I feel like they kind of offset each other because calls that are out of the money, way out of the money, are cheaper than puts that are in the money, and same thing on the other side. The calls at 600 are way more expensive than the 600 puts. So it's not a shocker that we have a fairly large gap in the number between the two. What I'm feeling here is that when you generally look at those numbers, it's kind of feeling like the week is balancing out. So there's not a huge, early sense of our usual heavy call ownership. 21,000 calls at the 700 level is a lot of optimism about the stock rising, but it's kind of offset by the fact that there are 27,000 puts. So I would say that you almost have to wait until Monday to see what people end up doing in terms of their purchases, because the numbers we're looking at here are somewhat the same as we've been looking at for the last 2 weeks. So until we have this new data in the form of the earnings to work off of, we're kind of in a stuck position. And I think the stuck position means that we kind of ride the same train we've been riding, which is stock price rises 20 or 30 points. And then as the week winds through, we sort of tail off back down below 650, which is sort of the pattern we've been riding, like I said, for the last 3 weeks. And it seems to be familiar based on what we're looking at in the put-call pattern. The other chart that I was going to include that might be hard for you to read is there's actually a chart from Yahoo that I'm adding in. And why this chart is useful is that the approach to Tesla has really been forced to change. Like, we could do a lot of things with very few data points before in terms of knowing what was going on. In this case, what we're looking at is we're looking at the forecast by 20 different analysts for the high, low, and medium target for both revenue and earnings for Tesla. And I believe that this is an important entity to sort of get your arms around if you're a Tesla investor, because understanding what the analysts are expecting can have a big impact on your ability to say, oh, you know, how, in essence, how is Tesla doing relative to the expectations of large institutions? Most of these analysts are paid by large institutions to analyze Tesla carefully, stay on top of the data, and make suggestions about buy, sell, or hold on the stock. So by looking in on what the trends are for the numbers that they have, and then being able to compare the profit revenue numbers that arrive against those that were forecast, it can influence a sense of, oh, Tesla's at, above, or below the general number that was expected, and therefore you can sort of see stock movement driven by what this reaction might have been. So as we go into this, I believe that, you know, Tesla did well. There's going to be an impairment charge issue, but the issue is Bitcoin did pop back up, and the amount of dollars involved with the impairment, if there was to be an inclusion, is fairly low. So I think it's a thing to be paying attention to, but I don't think it's a big deal. If Bitcoin had dropped by $5,000, $10,000 or something like that, now we're talking, you know, a decent percentage loss for what Tesla has owned. But we really haven't had that. We've had more of a in the ballpark. They made some money in the first quarter off selling some Bitcoin. But in general, it just seems like we're in the ballpark of what Tesla's costs were when they bought Bitcoin, and we seem to be roaming around in that territory still. Now, I have to admit that this show was a very, very difficult one for me, because it's really fun to be right. It's fun to say, hey, we predicted, as we did this past week, that the numbers would sort of land just below 650 as predicted, and the reasons why. And you could actually see the data to support that. So it's really fun to be right. It sucks to be wrong. And so I have to go out on the limb and sort of say, the data says that our week this week looks exactly like last week. But we're going to know more about what everyone thinks based on puts and calls purchased on Monday. And I really think prior to earnings, we need to actually do another show by midday Monday to help you catch up to what the changes are. Where's all the trading going on in terms of volume? How many new option purchases have there been at certain price points? All of that stuff I think is going to be big in terms of what happens with Tesla in the coming week. My take on things, frankly, is that I really believe Tesla's numbers are already known based on profit and revenue numbers we started with. The problem we have right now is it just seems to me that the market makers are saying we need to figure out how to make sure small investors don't make any money off of this big announcement on earnings. So therefore, we'll keep that money to ourselves by simply delaying the influence the stock might have had. So instead of, or the announcement might have had. So instead of having a nice move in the stock price that would happen post earnings, we end up with somewhat of a tepid move, call it 5, 10, 15 points. But then we get into the 3-day rule plus 4 to 5 business days out. And all of a sudden, we now have a good sense of what the big money managers are thinking and actually implementing. And so what we end up with is, well, wait a second, we just had big news. Shouldn't the stock move? Absolutely. But if you go back through the S&P announcement, 200 million shares traded, almost no movement in the stock immediately. Same thing in Q1. We're now in this new zone of we're thinking this thing should move. The options purchase people are doing is saying this thing should move, but we end up with very little movement, and all these people that purchased options, be it puts or calls anticipatorily, losing a bunch of money, and the market makers clean up because they sold all those covered puts or covered calls to folks who now have worthless instruments. So I have to say that this is not popular. I'm hoping Tesla stock goes up, but after a while, ignoring the data can be very expensive. So I therefore know what the data looks like, and I'm not happy with it, but that's the data. So I would say, I'd say don't listen to me because I'm stuck having to ride the data that I have rather than coming up with something brilliant that's other than what the data has to say, which I do not have. So therefore, it is what it is. I just wanted to note the chart that I put up, the numbers were clear because I just drew those down from the options sheet for this week. But the problem is that if you look at the chart that has analyst forecast and estimate numbers, et cetera, that we got from Yahoo, it's a very hard to read piece. And so I wanted to refer you to, if you just type in forecast for Tesla earnings at Yahoo, it'll bring you to that page quickly. So I'm going to post it. I doubt it's going to come out that great. And so just leave notes, and what I'll do is maybe retype it and post it on our Facebook page so you can have access to sort of key numbers there. Just, I think the key numbers for me would just be forecasted for the quarter, profit and revenue numbers, the average, the high, low, things like that, I think are kind of useful information to have to sort of go through to compare against what numbers Tesla does in fact deliver. So, and then that's the question is, what am I expecting? Frankly, I'm expecting we do the same thing Elon's been doing for the last 2 years. He knows the basic number he has to meet for earnings to get the profit percentage he wants, which is 23.5%. And all he does is he looks at the numbers, adds some cash from that they're pulling in from the EV tax credits to his profits, and that's the number. And so him doing this process constantly is one of the reasons why, there's, I want to say, anger on the part of the markets and a discounting of the stock price, because Elon is really not showing sustainable earnings figures without the EV tax credits to folks. And I can see why they don't like it, because those tax credits will disappear over time, and then what's your real earnings at that point? In which case you have to raise prices in order to maintain the margins that you're claiming. So I do think it's a challenge for the company, but hey, they got the revenue, and they can post a number and back that number up. So why argue? And so my answer to that is I'm not arguing. I'm just sort of stating the facts and allowing you to make your decision, based on what has been presented. So so my general forecast for the week is I think Tesla is going to do a very similar move the last 2 weeks, where we're expecting a very big push in the stock price if the numbers were better than anticipated. And I really think that the percentage of shares controlled by hedge funds have really declined. So I actually believe that Tesla would end up in a sort of a delay mode before we see a nice push in the stock price towards the end of the week. Could something else happen? Absolutely. Am I going to have an egg on our face if it does? Like, it could go way down or it could go way, way up. Those are both possibilities. But the problem I'm having with them is they kind of don't fit the data in terms of what we've been seeing for the last 3 weeks, what we've been seeing for the last 6 months as we entered the S&P. And so I have to admit this show was really painful to do based on the fact that it's really nice to be right versus wrong. But it's also hard to argue when you're looking at data and it sort of forces you down a certain lane. At any rate, again, I think we end up with, similar to last week and the week before, circumstances of a Tesla push up into the 760s, 70s, and then into week 750s again, with the folks at the big institutions starting to buy, allowing us to bridge the 700 price point. And I really don't think it happens until the end of the week into next week, because too many smaller investors would make money there. And the institutions don't seem to like letting the little guys win here. So, but that's what we're hoping for. At any rate, I would say best of luck as we enter the earnings zone this week. That is my forecast for what I think is going to happen. Please remember to like and subscribe. We have some shares of SpaceX if there's interest. We also wanted to encourage you to consider liking and subscribing and joining us on Patreon. In this next part of our segment is to get into our usual health tips. Don't forget, prior to lovemaking, no more than a salad or something small. This facilitates your ability to enjoy without blood flow issues to your stomach, limiting that blood flow to other extremities. We also wanted to encourage you to consider a 2-5 or one of the other fasting diets. And another item here would be core training. I've started doing it and I can't recommend it enough. You will feel fantastic and be a lot more stretched out in the process. So if you'd like more info, we could work to get it to you, but I think you'll find it helpful. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, Lahith, Hebrew, Choda, Hafez, Farsi, Strazvice, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, good day, Australia, hey do, Swedish. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for your indulgence and time. We look forward to constructive criticism. Have a great day, and bye for now.